So this is the three-part framework for building impact. It's very simple on the surface, and I'm going to break down exactly how to do it. Okay, so step one is you're coming off of your business problem discovery. Summarize the business problem. Okay, you've probably asked 4 or 5 questions by now to do your cause analysis and validate the business problem, probably a few more than that. The most natural way to transition into impact is to summarize. Okay, let me see if I get this right, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. Here's what I've heard so far. Summarize the problem. Did I get that right? As soon as they say yes, now you move on to step number 2. Ask an open-ended impact question. Right, did I get that right? Yes. Great, can you help me understand the ripple effects this challenge is having on the business? Okay, I'll walk you through some more open-ended impact questions in just a second. And then step number 3, once you've springboarded into exploring impact with that question, is now you'll start asking targeted impact questions to bring awareness to things they might not be thinking about. Now you're not just asking an open-ended impact question, you're asking about very specific impacts to get them thinking. And we'll talk about why it's so important to ask an open-ended impact question before a targeted one, and I'll give you several examples of questions. But for now, remember at the beginning of this course, I encouraged you to write things down, to take notes. This is a great point in which to do that, right? This 3-part framework, please remember this. It is so incredibly effective. I've never seen this not work. This is how you make exploring impact feel natural instead of manipulative and kind of rhetorical, which is very, very common. Okay, so I have already beat a dead horse on making this point, so I'm just going to show you what this looks like as we go on. But like I said, the first step is to summarize the business problem, which is these 3 parts: the problem, the current state you've understood, the cause analysis, and then springboard into asking for impact. So here's exactly what this would sound like. Okay, let's say they have a conversion rate issue, and I'm just gonna, voice over this. So step 1, remember, is summarize. Step 2 is open impact. That is what this slide represents. So let me summarize what I've heard so far. You're looking to roll out a call coaching program for your AEs. And what's driving you to do that is conversion rates are sitting stubbornly at 20%, and your CEO wants to lift that to 25%. Now, when you think through the cause of this gap, the main issue is that your reps are feature dumping and not selling enough against pain, value, and outcomes. Did I get that right? So we just completed step 1. The customer is going to respond, okay, great. So from here, can you help me understand the ripple effects this conversion rate challenge has on the rest of the business? That talk track is worth memorizing and inserting the customer's unique problem, right? I have never seen that not work. It is super effective and it feels so, so natural, and it gets customers opening up like floodgates when it comes to sharing impact. So I'm going to give you a few examples of open impact questions. Okay, so this is step 2 of that 3-step sequence. Step 1 was summarize the business problem. Step 2 is ask open-ended impact questions. Okay, so here are a few of them, and then we'll continue. Earlier, I asked what challenges you were facing that would derail you, right? We started the conversation that way. Can you help me understand how that would derail you? Right, so asking about how a problem would derail is asking about impact. Can you help me understand the ripple effects this challenge has on the rest of the business? I found the term ripple effects to be very effective. It's far more effective than saying the word impact, because for some reason, buyers have come to expect that from salespeople. So it feels a little bit manipulative. And a ripple effect sounds like you've got a little bit of a extra business acumen than most salespeople. So give that a try. How is this challenge impacting the business as a whole? Right, try that one. Who else does this challenge impact and how? right? You're seeing how pervasively this problem affects the rest of the organization, which, as a side note, will help you get access to those other people if you want them. What's driving you to solve this issue now rather than later? Okay, they'll start to speak to the urgency and why that urgency exists. So take a screenshot of this slide and just have it handy. It's a really good way to start practicing asking for impact, a really safe way to do it as well. Go give maybe 2 or 3 of these a try on your next few sales calls and see what happens. Now, let's start talking about the difference between open and targeted questions. Okay, so these are step 2 and 3 of that framework. Remember, step 1 was summarize the business problem. Step 2 was ask an open-ended impact question. And step 3 is ask targeted questions. Now, here's the difference between those last 2. Open questions are open-ended and they allow the buyer to go whichever direction they choose. That is a very important point to understand. They give the buyer permission. They make the buyer feel in control of the conversation because you're not trying to funnel them into anything in particular yet. Targeted questions do funnel the buyer into something you want to funnel them into. They narrow the buyer's focus to something specific you'd like them to talk about. So an example of an open-ended question or an open impact question is help me understand the ripple effects this conversion rate challenge is having on the business. They can go wherever the hell they want, right? They feel totally free to answer how they want. Now, an example of a targeted question on the same business problem would be, to what extent is this conversion rate issue affecting your customer acquisition costs? Right now we're funneling them in to a specific issue. And we're going to talk about how to use these 2 techniques together. Okay, so here's a couple more examples. Actually, this is the exact same example I just gave. I'm ahead of the curve today. This is probably worth screenshotting. So I'm glad I put it on a slide. But we'll skip through this. Now, here's the important point to understand between these 2 techniques. Why do you ask an open question before a targeted question? Okay, so think about that. I gave you a hint a few minutes ago. Try to answer that question before we move on. Here's the reason. We already talked about this. Asking an open question gives you permission to then ask a targeted question. Okay, so if you start by giving your buyer the freedom to go wherever they want and to feel in control, and you start that way, and then you ask a targeted question, now they will play ball with you. Okay, they feel in control of the conversation because you started by giving them control. And now you can start to ask your targeted impact questions without any negative ramifications. It works like magic. Now, if you did the opposite, let's say you summarize the business problem and you start asking very funneled, targeted questions, the buyer is going to freeze up and feel manipulated because you never gave them the freedom to answer how they wanted to. Now, even though in the first situation where you lead with an open question, you eventually do try to funnel them, they don't feel like they're being funneled because you let them go wherever they wanted to go as a way of starting that part of the conversation. Okay, this is a very important psychological aspect to understand to be a great SaaS account executive. It's so important. So here's a few examples of starting with an open question and then relaying into targeted questions. So here's an open one. How is this conversion rate impact or problem impacting the rest of the business? Buyer has freedom. They can go wherever they want. They don't even have to answer it. You've given them the freedom. That's the important part. Now we can start to funnel them. How is it impacting your cost of acquisition? Okay, they're not taken back by that because they already feel free. To what extent is marketing impacted by this as they think about generating leads for the sales team to convert? Is your CFO concerned with this metric due to its impact on cost of acquisition and lifetime value? Okay, that conversation will go incredibly well. And it's all because you started with an open question and then challenged your buyer to think about specific issues. The order in which you do that matters.